Congressman Barry Loudermilk, Republican of Georgia, has been sounding the alarm of January 6th and all of the lies, distortions, and we're going to get the truth because a committee has been stood up, and I believe, sir, you're going to chair it. Welcome to the show, and congratulations on your book, And Then They Prayed, Moments in American History Impacted by Prayer. Congressman, welcome. How are you?
I'm doing well. How are you doing, Derek?
I'm psyched that you're going to have this committee. Tell us how it's going to work.
Well, we're about 9 months late getting this thing continued going, and we're going to basically pick up where we left off back in December of last year. But one of our priorities is going to be this pipe bomb. I think that is the key to unraveling a lot of the mysteries related to January 6th. Look, we know from the investigative work, incredible work my team and committee did in the last Congress, there's more fiction out there than there are facts about what really happened on January 6th. So I think a lot of our questions can be answered through the FBI at this point.
Fascinating. Now, you're talking about the pipe bomb that was put in front of the DNC, correct?
Both the RNC and the DNC. There's still a lot of questions there. As one of the biggest questions is, with all these resources that the FBI had to go after hundreds of people and prosecute hundreds of people, some did go in the Capitol, some never go in the Capitol, right? But you had thousands of people out there that they were put all hands on deck to investigate. They a couple of pipe bombs. There's serious questions that arise there. We've been told in the past, well, the identity of the pipe bomber was in a data set from one of the carriers that was corrupted when we asked them for that data. One of my initial questions regarding this is, well, didn't you already have that data because you were using it to prosecute all these other people? So now that we have a friendly administration who will be helping us actually obtain information, I think we're a whole lot closer to figuring some things out. Another priority is going to be, how did this happen? Look, DOJ, FBI have already admitted they had paid informants in some of the more extremist groups that were there. At 35 paid informants. Look, these informants are to gain intelligence from. So if you had that many people embedded within the crowds outside the Capitol, how in the world did you not know this was coming? I think the answer is they did. Then my question is, what did you do with that intelligence?
Well, look, I think they wanted it to happen because they wanted to cancel President Trump and tarnish MAGA. That's a theory. And speaking of theories, right, do you have let me ask you this. I actually said something. It's interesting I said it. I said, what about the pipe bomb in front of the DNC? And you pointed out there was one in front of the RNC as well. It's fascinating. Yeah. The media often pointed out only the DNC so they could make Democrats look like the victims. Maybe it's too early to come up with something, but what do you have a theory? Do you have a theory? You think we're going to find out from the FBI? Like, was this an information operations, a government campaign to do what I just said, to tarnish Trump and MAGA?
You know, Greg, I've got some theories on that, and you always start off with several theories, and you're doing an investigation. I feel my job is to prove a theory wrong. You know, if you go out to prove a theory right, you inevitably will do it because you'll dismiss other information that could be contrary to your theory. But if you try to prove a theory wrong and you can't, then you've pretty much nailed the truth. From all the theories that we had looked at as to what happened, the one that still we haven't been able to disprove, and again, we still have a lot more information we haven't been able to obtain from the last administration that I think we'll get now, is if you look at 2020, it was a year of riots. Most of the riots across the country were associated with Democrat causes. Not necessarily the party, but they were more associated as Democrat-related, whether it was BLM or Antifa or whatever. That was a black mark on the Democrat Party. There is the potential, and I'm just saying this is a theory, is it would really help if the Republicans would riot somewhere. And so one theory that exists is the government just kind of like allowed it to happen. And I think they never anticipated people would get into the Capitol, right? But that would be good imagery if you had Republicans that were tearing down a statue or burning a bonfire or putting up a gallows outside the Capitol. That is the image that they would like to put out. So that's one theory. Another theory that I've also looked at is just blatant incompetence, that intelligence wasn't passed on to the Capitol Police. I mean, they weren't ready. Chief Stephen Sund will tell you, he was chief of police then, they weren't ready because they didn't have the intelligence that apparently existed. So I will tell you this, I do believe there was a lot of politics involved in a lot of decisions. We proved that when it came to the Department of Defense and the deployment of the National Guard. It was a political decision to hold the National Guard back until after the violence was over because they didn't like the optics. When the National Guard, if they would have been deployed when they were requested, and again, Donald Trump had delegated the deployment of the National Guard on January the 3rd. It was totally within the scope of the Department of Defense. Had they deployed the National Guard when they were finally actually requested, I think some lives would have been saved, especially one particular Roseanne Bullen, I believe her name was, that was trampled to death on the West Front. That happened during that time that the National Guard would have been there. But a decision was made because they didn't like the optics of it. So there were a lot of political decisions made that day.
Sir, may I suggest the timeline is fascinating to me that day? You know, the dominant media, the culture has said, well, they stormed the Capitol to stop the electoral count process. They wanted to stop it and stop the handover, peaceful transfer of power. I've looked at this timeline very, very closely, and it seems to me, look, I'm pretty sure they were let in. Those cops were waving them in. We saw the doors open. I believe they wanted the rioters inside so they could stop not the counting of the electoral votes, but the debate about the electoral votes and the election, because the debate basically stopped. A lot of people changed their votes, like your former colleague from Georgia, Kelly Loeffler. They were spooked. They were spooked. And I feel like this was engineered, not to stop the counting, but to stop the debate over the counting. And I know some of it continued, but it was obviously dead in the water after January 6th because everybody was totally traumatized. Does that make sense?
I mean, that is a theory a lot of people have. Another aspect of it, you mentioned timeline, is a lot of people don't understand. The Capitol was actually breached while Trump was still speaking.
Yeah.
Okay? He was still speaking. It wasn't this massive crowd that came down and then stormed the Capitol. It was a group of folks. I mean, most of them were wearing tactical gear. I've been to rallies. I've been to political events. I've never been to one wearing a tactical vest. Okay? So there were these people, many of them in tactical gear, already at the Capitol. The Capitol was breached before the crowd actually came down there. Now, according to the Capitol Police, they became overwhelmed because they weren't prepared. And so an order came down from the command is to stop trying to arrest people, just follow them and make sure they don't break anything. That also, we do have evidence of the first people who entered into the Capitol went and they knew where the doors were and everything. They went and opened doors, and these are fire escape doors. And so they're programmed to, once they're opened, they can't be relocked until the architect at the Capitol comes with a key and relocks them. So a lot of instances you had Capitol police officers standing and just guarding doors. But our question in that aspect, and that's another theory of all this, is the police officers standing at the doors were basically following orders, but because they were overwhelmed. But we do have evidence of law enforcement officers, particularly Metropolitan Police Department officers, encouraging people to go in.
It's amazing.
From the outside. So until we get more information, which I think we're going to be able to get to now, that I wasn't able to get to before because we were stonewalled by the Democrats and stonewalled by the Biden administration. We actually have people within this administration that want to get to the truth, and I think they're going to work with us very closely to find that information we need to get to the bottom of this. But until we get that information, you and I are working on different theories.
One more thing, and then I want to get to your book. I recommend, I don't recommend their books, but there might be some useful evidence in here. Harry Dunn, the cop who we just heard crying a moment ago, writes in his own book that on January 6th, the morning of, they were all handed, his little unit there, brand new riot helmets. And he says right there in the book, this had never happened in his 15 years, whatever it was, on the force. And he'd like to know why, on that day of all days, he gets a brand new riot helmet. He sounded very suspicious. The other thing, in Liz Cheney's book, she admits that she hired Secret Service, her own private retired members of the Secret Service, to keep her safe on January 6th. She says it in her own book, and she says a lot of other incriminating things. To me, both are deeply, I think that's important info.
Yeah, and I have been through their books. We've used that as some of the starting points in our investigation. But I can tell you about Harry Dunn's. There's little I take any validity in. When you go through his book, you just played that clip at the beginning. I would not accept any of that as truth. I mean, we could take you through the videos in his book. He talks about doing all these heroic actions, and in most cases, he wasn't even where he said he was going to be, and his actions on videotape were totally different than what he explained in his book. And so most of what he claims that he did on that day are verifiably false, and we've provided that information before. But yeah, there is so much that now that we're getting this committee stood up, we've got a great team already put together, already working on this. I think we're going to be able to make a whole lot more headway. I mean, it took us most of the previous 2 years of the committee I was running was spent finding documents that had mysteriously disappeared. And so we're going to continue looking for those. But we were able to find enough to actually dispel a whole lot of what the original Select Committee claimed happened on that day.
Well, it's so important. And anybody who says, let's not look back, let's face it, they look back. The Democrats were obsessed, Joe Biden obsessed, using January 6th as a weapon to silence people, to silence the political debate.